So I couldn't get a hold of him for a little bit. So we said, okay, you gotta tell him. So eventually he called me back, and I kind of went down these and said, okay, you treat these people, you know they're disabled, yeah. And this animal is necessary, yeah. Like, okay, so it's just curious. You treat both of these families because we got 2 requests. Yeah, I treat a lot of people in that community. Okay. Are you familiar with what this means? And so I explained to him. He's like, oh, okay. I said, so as a PA, is this your general practice? And this may have crossed the line based on what UALD and HUD thinks now, but is this your general practice to treat these type of mental disabilities and regularly prescribe this? Well, no, this, in my 20 years of practice, these are the only 2 companion animals I've ever prescribed. I'm like, oh, okay, well, all right, well, I just wanted to confirm this with you. Thanks for calling me back, and that's it. So we had to approve those 2. However, because we made that phone call and kind of trained him on what this was, nobody else went to him, or if they did, he didn't sign any more forms. And so that's part of the verification process, is to help train these medical professionals to understand what it is exactly they're signing. Because sometimes you just come up and, hey, I can't have my dog in my place unless you sign this, whatever,
If you can't get a hold of a medical professional, to verify it, in the meantime, are you supposed to hold that apartment until you get that verification?
So that kind of goes back to his request, or his question. If they're requesting an assistance animal in the application process, their application is not complete until we've gone through that. So you could potentially have a policy that if another applicant comes in with a complete application, you can approve that first.
So here it says that you're prohibited from charging pet rent or other fees normally charged to persons with pets. So they don't have to put down anything?
Right.
No deposit, no monthly fee.
Well, you can require a deposit on the lease as you normally would, just not a specific pet deposit. Is that your question? Yeah. You can still have them sign the same lease everybody else does, same requirements as everybody else. You just can't make additional requirements on them because of their assistance animal.
So would it be a nuisance if you start finding the dog pooping on the grass and stuff like that?
No. Number nine here, all communities should have animal rules. Even if you don't allow pets, you should have animal rules because inevitably you're going to have animals in your place. Persons who obtain an animal by reasonable accommodation generally must abide by those rules, except breed restrictions and size and weight restrictions. And those rules should be given to residents with animals. So you can say part of your rules obviously is going to be you must clean up after your animal. Your animal cannot be a nuisance to other tenants. Your animal must still abide by the noise policy and stuff like that. And if you fail to abide by those rules and regulations, that's a breach of your lease.
So they may pick up after themselves, and that's acceptable? Or can you say, I don't want any crap on the lawn, I don't care, you're picking up the lawn?
Well, if you have to allow assistance animals, you're probably going to have to understand that they've got to have
Then
somewhere.
the other one is, they can pick up poop, but they can't pick up pee.
Yeah.
And that you don't want, because it kills the plants. Also inside the house on the carpets and the window treatments. and things.
Right, but that would be damaging, right?
Mhm.
Particularly inside the unit. So
that would be
you can
grounds-
assess damages
grounds
and
for
stuff like that.
eviction.
Uh-huh.
Not just fines, but grounds for eviction.
Right.
Okay.
If there's damage, I would first address that damage and try to say, hey, it needs to be.
If you were able to detect dog urine in the carpet, use a black light or something, that's considered damage if it exists, whether the carpet has been, whether the carpet is dissolved or not, right?
Right.
Just the presence of it is considered damage.
Right, but it's damage, so what's your first recourse? Not necessarily eviction, but having to pay for that damage. Okay, so you go in and say, I'm gonna have to replace this carpet because of all the damage. You're my tenant right now, it's much easier to get money out of you while you know where they are than once they've left on you. I'm gonna charge you for carpet replacement, pad replacement right now.
But if you don't
gotta
pay that,
If you don't pay that,
then
you
you
can give them a
take
3-day.
it out there.
That's
Yeah.
your
security deposit.
That's your grounds for
If it's enough.
Yes.
But you don't have to change it right now.
No, I would collect the damage and say, once you're gone, I'm gonna replace this, but I'm certainly not gonna replace it right now and let you damage the new stuff again. Yeah. Okay, so we talked about earlier that the Disability Law Center and UALD have a grant to do testing. They are doing testing. They're doing testing on all of the protected classes and everything related to fair housing. But disabilities, and this one is an easy one because if you're not trained, it's easy to get tripped up on a reasonable accommodation request, particularly companion animals. So if somebody, if a prospective tenant calls you and asks about any reasonable accommodation request, but particularly animals, this is what you say. This community, or me as a landlord, I fully comply with the fair housing laws as it applies to disabilities. Persons who desire an accommodation must convey that request to management, who will then attempt to obtain sufficient verified information to determine if the request can be granted and how it can be accommodated. Since every situation is different, each request is treated separately. It's impossible to give a blanket answer on questions of accommodation. If you as a prospective tenant desire to apply, we will then accept any request and make a full review to see if we can accommodate it. There's your answer. That keeps you out of testing issues. That keeps you out of fair housing problems, even for real prospective
What
tenants.
sort of testing? Scientific testing? you mean?
No, like.
No, the
people call
Disability
it
Law
the
Center has a grant,
Yeah.
and they have people out there calling landlords
kind of tests.
and trying to catch you.
Yeah.
Over the past 2 years, they have filed 33 complaints solely based off of testing.
Here.
Yep, in Utah. Out of those, they've had a couple findings. They've had several that have resolved. They've had a couple that they didn't win on, but 33 in the last 2 years. I don't know how many hundreds of calls and stuff like they've made. Very likely some of you have been tested and you may or may not already know it.
You don't show up though.
But sometimes they will show up. Generally for you guys, it's harder to show up because they don't just walk into an office or something like that. But they may meet you. They don't have the money to fill out an application. So if you just say this and say, come in and apply, or meet me and apply, once you apply, then we can assess your reasonable accommodation, you're gonna stop the test because they're not gonna actually pay you to do the application, okay? So yeah, we abide by all fair housing laws. Why don't you come in and apply? Let me know what your reasonable accommodation request is at that time, and we'll assess that as part of the application process.
So you're talking about coming through your credit, the money from credit, the background check,
That's why they
earnest
call it.
money or whatever.
Yep.
And to go through it and then fill this out and then we assess that.
Right, yeah. It won't get that far in the testing
Yeah.
process. So,
That's good, yeah.
So any questions on these forms? We've taken more than the full time. Go ahead.
So, let's look at a place to, for the apartment, are they supposed to bring up the service animal?
Yeah, you don't have any reason to ask. And I wouldn't generally advise asking, hey, are you disabled and do you have any accommodations you need? I would just let them bring that up on their own initiative.
As you said earlier, anyone can fill this out, so really, there should never be a case of forging this document, because anybody can sign it.
Well, but they might have their
Everybody-
friend say Dr. Smith.
Oh, if
They're not actually a doctor.
purport to be
Yes.
a qualified
Yeah.
professional.
But if they
But
put
if
on
they're
here,
just Joe
best
Blow, my
friend,
buddy, yeah.
then it may not necessarily mean that we deny automatically, but now we can investigate a little bit more and say, why are you qualified to
People in
verify?
this market know that, so they probably would just get their friend to sign it.
I would actually say people in this market don't know that. If you kind of suggest, hey, go have your doctor sign this, or go have your medical professional sign this, they're gonna think, okay, I gotta get my caseworker, or my social worker, or my therapist, or my doctor to sign it. Most of them aren't gonna run and say, oh, you told me, go get somebody to sign this, I'm gonna have my best friend sign it or something.
Back to something you said before, is that they're in the place and then you find an animal and you give them a 3-day to quit or comply, and then you can give them a termination at the same time?
You can give them an end of term notice, yes.
Even though they're still within the year, like they sign a year lease and they're only 6 months into the lease?
Well, but the end of term notice is gonna be for the end of their lease still.
Oh,
It'll be 6
okay.
months away.
Okay,
You know.
great.
Meaning you're not gonna renew, but you're gonna.
Right,
stay there till the end.
basically meaning you're not gonna renew, yeah, it's not an end of term notice like, hey, we're done.
We're done.
It's, you violated my lease, and no matter whether you comply or not, I'm not
Okay.
renewing you. So, any other questions? All right, well, be careful. Fair housing complaints can get you personally into trouble, because if you have a company, they can potentially bring the complaint against the company, management, and you personally. And just because you have a limited liability company or something like that, it will not absolve you from liability under the Fair Housing Act. They will name you personally, and they can bring this claim against you personally. So those potential fines are assessed against you, and you can't say, oh, this was my company, absolve the company, and, absolve your liability. It's still gonna be against you. So take these serious, be careful. Sometimes you're gonna let people in who are abusing the system. Better to do that than pay $10,000, $50,000 in a fair housing fine.
Did you bring some cards along with you?
Of course.
So how much do you charge for eviction?
So any of you who are not my clients, since you're asking,